Sorry, Toby. We're gonna. I hit the button to start. So we've got some people on. Right now, it's about 3 minutes before 11 o'clock. So we're gonna hang out for 3 minutes, and we're gonna start at 11 promptly. So thank you for joining early. Those of you who are already on the call and hang tight, we're gonna let the rest of the people join, and then we'll start at 11. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is 11 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Thank you guys for joining. Looks like we have a pretty decent crowd, and I expect more people to log on as we get as we roll. But I like to start on time, and we'll end on time. So let's go ahead and get going, everybody. So today's 1031 Exchange webinar is actually one of my favorites. It's growing your business with 1031 Exchange and DSTs. So for those of you who don't know what DSTs are, you're going to get a lot of good information. But one of the great things about today's webinar, especially during this particular time, is that we're going to talk about some techniques that you can employ to help grow your business with real estate investors. And I think now is a particularly good time to think about how to grow your business, because the steps that you take now to work on yourself professionally are going to pay dividends going forward. So you're going to plant some seeds today, and then 6 months, 12 months from now, you're going to be getting new listings and doing a lot more business. So today's webinar, Growing Your Business with 1031 Exchange and DST. My name is Leonard Spoto. I'm going to be your host today. I run a company called Asset Exchange Company. We are a 1031 Exchange accommodator. And today we've got a very special guest. He's one of the best in the business. His name is Toby Costello. And I've known Toby for a very long time. He is the investor relations guy over at Hamilton Zance, which is one of the premier DST / co-ownership real estate companies. And we've known them for a very long time, and they do a fantastic job. So you're in for a very good presentation today. So for those of you who joined us, thank you for doing so. Couple housekeeping items before we get started. So the first thing is that if you have a question during today's presentation, please do type your question in and get it on over to me. I will try to address all the questions during the hour. If it takes us a little bit longer than an hour to answer all questions, you guys are welcome to stay on after we end and end the formal presentation and just keep peppering us with questions. We're happy to answer everything that comes over. The second thing is we do record these presentations, so we're going to send out a copy of the presentation material as well as a link to the recording. So if you want to review this or send it over to a colleague later, you're going to have the ability to do so. So thank you all for joining us today. Let's go ahead and get this show started. Again, my name is Leonard Spoto, and the company that I work for or that I have started is Asset Exchange Company. I'm one of the owners of the company. And the first thing I want to do today is talk about the most recent update in the 1031 exchange industry. So I know that we're going to talk about growing your business, but I do want to start with some important information that we got from the IRS regarding 1031 exchanges. So due to the COVID-19 situation and the shelter in place, the IRS back in April gave all 1031 exchange clients an extension. And the extension that they gave us wasn't particularly great, and there's some ambiguity in the extension, and we're asking for some clarification. But what we know right now is that the IRS is going to extend both the day 45 and the day 180 for clients whose deadlines were between April 1st and July 15th. So if you have a day 45 or a day 180 that falls between those deadlines, April 1st and July 15th, you automatically get your deadline extended to July 15th. So let me give you an example here. I've got two scenarios for two different clients. I've got taxpayer Bob, and taxpayer Bob sold his property back on March 1st. He closed escrow on March 1st. That would put his day 45 at April 15th. But because of the IRS extension, his day 45 is now extended to July 15th. All right, so he's going to automatically have an additional 3 months to identify. All right, that's one example. Let's take another example. Taxpayer Sue, she went and she did a transaction way back in October. So she closed on October 4th. That puts her day 180 at April 1st, which is within our time frame that we would need to be in to get relief. And so that pushes her day 180 to July 15th, but she does not get any extension for her day 45. Does that make sense? If you have a time frame, either a day 45 or a day 180, between April 1st and July 15th, you automatically get that time frame pushed to July 15th. So we were hoping for a little bit better relief and extensions, but this is what the IRS gave us. And as we learn more, if they give us any additional relief, or if they come out and clarify this a little bit more, then we will let you know as soon as the IRS lets us know. All right, so that's the most kind of pressing thing in our industry right now. Nazarene wants to know, well, geez, what if my sale happens today? So if you close escrow today, you're going to get some relief because your day 45 will fall before July 15th, but only by a couple weeks, and you'll be able to extend your day 45 to July 15th. So really, if you close anytime after June 1st, you're not going to get any relief because 45 days after June 1st will be July 15th. All right. So the only way you're going to get any relief is if you close before 6/1. Does that make sense, Nazarene? All right. If you guys have further questions about this extension, you can shoot me an email. If you have a personal situation you're wondering if you're going to get extensions on, if it's unclear, just go ahead and give me a call or shoot me an email after this presentation. All right. So that's kind of our first and most pressing update in the 1031 exchange industry. But let's do this. Let's jump into the presentation and let's talk about how you guys in the real estate world can use 1031 exchange to grow your business. And I love this quote from Warren Buffett. He says, "Someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago." And ladies and gentlemen, it is the time right now to start planting seeds. There's not a ton of business going on. A lot of people are sitting at home wondering when and if we're going to open up and when we're going to get back to normal. But you can use this time, because you've got time on your hands, to go out and start planting seeds with investors to hopefully start working with them either tomorrow or in 12 months, right? The more you do today, the more conversations you have today with investors, the more deals you will do in the future. So let's talk about the investor market, okay? And Toby, if you could mute your phone, that would be great. I think we can hear you. So let's talk about the investor market, all right? So the investor market, I think, is a fantastic market. CoreLogic came out with a study, and we have seen increased investor activity in the market year over year. In fact, 1 out of every 10 real estate transactions is conducted by an investor. And a lot of people think, well, geez, I'm not a commercial agent. How am I going to work with investors? Well, the good thing is you do not have to be a commercial agent and work with these big institutional players, because most of the investment real estate in the United States is owned by mom and pops, okay? CoreLogic came out with a study as well that 60% of all investor activity is mom and pop. It's not these big institutions. It's people like you and me who own rental real estate. Now, the great thing about the investor market as well is once you start working with investors, you're going to continue working with investors. And the reason why is because investors, my 1031 exchange clients, are very active, okay? The average homeowner will do a transaction once every 7 years, but the average investor that I work with does a transaction once every 2.5 years. In fact, I usually do about 150 deals per month, and 1/3 of all of my business is from repeat clients. Now, these repeat clients are fantastic because they're investors, they're looking to build wealth in real estate. So not only are they doing more deals, they're generally doing larger transactions. So for you as a real estate investor, larger transactions equal larger commissions, right? So you're going to get multiple commissions and you're going to get larger commissions when you work with investors. And then the thing that I think makes the 1031 exchange client the perfect client for a real estate professional is that these clients are going to be the most motivated clients that you have. Now, let me ask you a question. Has anyone that's on the call worked with a homeowner and they said, hey, I would like to buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in this particular area, and you show them the perfect listing? They walk in and they look around and they say, oh, I don't know, this doesn't feel right. And then you go out and you show that client 15 or 20 or 30 more properties. And then they back out and they say, you know what, we can't find anything that feels right. I'm sure you've all had a client like that at some point. Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, a 1031 exchange client is not going to do that. A 1031 exchange client is going to be the most motivated client that you have. Because the 1031 exchange client, if they do not complete their transaction, they are going to face a very large tax liability. It is not uncommon for my clients to have $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 tax bills if they do not complete their exchange. So these people are motivated by a huge tax bill to get their deal done. The clients are also motivated because they have 180 days to complete their transaction and 45 days to identify. So they are on a very strict time frame. These are going to be your best clients. I guarantee it. Now, how do you work with these clients? How do you grow your business by working with 1031 exchange investors? Well, I'm going to give you the magic formula. So if you're not paying attention, take a look at your computer screen right now. The magic formula for working with 1031 exchange investors is right here. Number one, understand the 1031 exchange. Now, you don't have to be a tax attorney. You don't need to know all the nuances of Section 1031, but you do need to have conversational skills when it comes to 1031, and we're going to go over that today. Number two, understand why investors exchange. If you know why an investor is going to consider an exchange, you can have conversations with them about the 1031 exchange process. Number two, when you are marketing yourself, don't market yourself. Market solutions, because solutions get deals done. And then finally, you need to build a top-notch team. So you're going to need to have people like me and people like Toby available to help you provide solutions for the investors that you want to work with. All right? So let's talk about the first thing, understanding 1031 exchange. Now, I'm going to go over this quickly. So if you need further clarification on anything, shoot me an email. But let's understand 1031 exchange at a 50,000 foot level, because that's all you need, right? If you understand the basics of 1031 and you have my phone number, you're going to be able to work on even the most complex 1031 exchange transaction out there. You're a realtor, okay? Do what you do best, buy and sell property. I'm a 1031 exchange expert. Let me handle the details. But it's going to be helpful if you know your way around at a high level what 1031 exchange is. So what is 1031 exchange? Well, it is a piece of the tax code, Internal Revenue Code Section 1031, that allows you to defer the taxes on the sale of an investment property. Now, in order to qualify for a tax deferral, 4 basic guidelines need to be met. Okay, so let's talk about guideline number 1. When you do a 1031 exchange, you are only eligible to exchange properties that have been held for productive use in trade or investment. Okay, so it has to be business or investment property that you are exchanging out of and into. So you're going to sell a property that's been held for business or investment, and you're going to buy a property to complete your exchange that you use for investment or business purposes. Now, the tax code actually states that properties involved in an exchange have to be like kind, but this is a source of confusion for a lot of my clients. Listen to this. All real estate is like kind as long as it is business or investment. Now, there's a couple exceptions, but you have the opportunity to exchange out of land and into a rental home. You can sell the rental home and exchange into an apartment building. You can sell the apartment building and you can exchange into a fractional interest in a large institutional grade property. All real estate is like kind. All right. So a lot of people ask me, well, geez, Leonard, if I sell a 2-unit building, do I have to buy another 2-unit building? The answer to that is no. Okay. You can go into any type of real estate. Now, there are 2 exceptions, though. You cannot go into a property outside of the United States. All right. So if you sell in California, you cannot buy in Mexico. If you sell in Texas, you cannot buy in Canada. However, you can go from California to Texas, from Texas to Ohio, and Ohio to Colorado. Anywhere in the United States works. The other exception is you cannot exchange inventory. All right. Inventory for real estate purposes is a development deal or a quick flip. And quick flips are not exchangeable. The rule of thumb, ladies and gentlemen, is that you want to season your rental for at least 1, but preferably 2 years in order for the property to be exchangeable. All right. So rule number 1, make sure your property qualifies. All right, a couple people have asked me if this presentation is going to be available later, and yes, it will be, and we are also recording it. So you will get an email, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, with a copy of the slides as well as a link to the recorded YouTube presentation. All right, rule number 1, make sure your property is qualified. Rule number 2, if you don't want to pay taxes when you do your exchange, you need to remember 2 things. Reinvest all of your cash and purchase property equal or greater. Now, let's assume I sold a property for $1.1 million. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce my exchange requirement by my closing costs and my commissions. That gets me down to $1 million net. If I don't want to pay taxes, I'm going to have to go out and buy real estate for $1 million net to replace it. All right. So when you do an exchange, you have to purchase property equal or greater in value. All of the cash that comes out of your sale comes to the 1031 exchange company, and then you use that cash as a down payment to buy your replacement property. All right. If you do those 2 things, if you reinvest all the cash and you purchase property equal or greater in value, you defer 100% of your taxes. Now, what happens if you don't do that? What happens if you sell for $1 million and you buy for $950? Well, it's not the end of the world, but the $50,000 difference is going to be taxable. All right? That's fine as long as you're aware that you will have some tax liability. Now, again, if you don't want to pay taxes, you have to reinvest all the cash and purchase property equal or greater in value. If you have debt on the property that you are selling, you are going to replace that debt when you go to buy your new property. You can get another loan or you contribute additional cash so that you're buying enough real estate, right? The key is you need to replace the value of what you sold. So that means most of you, when you're doing exchanges, will go out and get another loan in order to do that if you had a loan on the property that you sold. Make sense? All right, so rule number 1, make sure that your property qualifies. Rule number 2, reinvest all of your cash and purchase property equal or greater in value. Rule number 3, when you do your 1031 exchange, you've got a time frame. All right? All exchanges need to be done within 180 days, and you need to identify what you're thinking of buying on day 45. Your time frame for your exchange starts the day you close escrow. You have 180 calendar days to get your exchange done. That means you have to buy and close on replacement property on or before day 180. Now, 180 days is 6 months. That's plenty of time to get your deal done. Most people do not complain about the 180 days when they have their exchange. Most people stress out about this, day 45. Day 45 is the date that you need to identify what you're thinking about buying. Now, again, because of the COVID-19 situation, you may have an extension to July 15th on your day 45. But if you're closing anytime after June, you're not. Okay, you're not going to get an extension. So most people, if they're closing after June, they're not going to get any extensions unless the government does something different. So day 45 is going to be very important. It's the day you need to officially declare what you're thinking about buying. Now, how do you do that? Well, as I mentioned, you're going to fill out an identification letter. The identification letter needs to be signed by you, and you need to list all of the properties you're considering buying. And there's 2 ways in which you can fill out this letter. You can use the 3 property rule and you can nominate 1, 2, or 3 pieces of real estate. However, when you nominate those 3 properties on day 45, you are locked in to buying from that list. So if day 46 comes and property number 1 gets sold to someone else, you cannot replace it. If day 47 comes and this property burns to the ground, you cannot replace it. You've got 1 property left on your list, and if you don't get in contract to buy that property, you fail your exchange. Now, what happens when you fail your exchange? Well, when you fail your exchange, you pay taxes, right? So it's not the end of the world, but if you don't want to pay taxes, you need to make sure that you can get something that you've identified. So very, very important in this process is to go out and start looking for suitable replacement property as early as possible. It's good to have a plan, a backup plan, okay, so that you don't fail your exchange. The sooner you know what you're thinking about buying, the better. With the 3 property rule, you're going to get 3 bites at the apple. All right, 1, 2, 3. Now, if you're interested in buying more than 3 properties, you're going to have to use what's called the 200% rule to identify. The 200% rule says, hey, you can go out and identify as many properties as you want. There's no limit on the number of properties. However, there is a limit on the value. The total value of everything you identify cannot exceed 200% of what you sold. So, I'll give you an example. If you sold a property for $1 million, you can identify $2 million or 200%, $2 million worth of value. That could be 6 properties, as in my example, or maybe you go out to Texas and maybe it's 15 properties. Doesn't matter the number. What we care about when we identify using the 200% rule is you do not exceed 200% of the value of what was sold. 2 ways to identify. You either going to nominate 3 properties, or if you want to identify more than 3, you have to use the 200% rule. All right, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. The 4 basic guidelines to do a 1031 exchange. If you remember these guidelines, you're going to be in a very good position to work with investors who want to exchange. If you forget every single thing I said, as soon as we hang up the phone today, that's fine, as long as you remember my phone number. All right? You don't need to be an expert in this. This is what we do every day, and I've been doing it for 20 years. So we're going to be able to work with you and your clients on any of these issues or any complex issues that even get more complicated. But I want you to remember these, because the more you understand this stuff, the better you're going to be able to work with investors. All right. So step number 1 to working with investors is to understand the basics of 1031. The more important step is to understand why your client might do an exchange. If you understand why your client might do an exchange, you can start having conversations with them about doing 1031 exchanges. So the reason why most clients will do an exchange is because they don't want to pay taxes, right? It makes sense. Did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that the tax rate between the federal and state and the depreciation and the Medicare tax that you're going to pay, it all combines to about 33% if you cash out of your property? So if you have a listing that's a rental, the first thing that you should do is tell your client, hey, you don't have to pay the tax if you do an exchange. And as soon as people realize that they can save tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes, they are highly motivated to at least consider a 1031 exchange. Now, the other reason to consider a 1031 exchange is because if you do not have to give money to the government, that money stays in your pocket and you are able to utilize the money that would have gone to Uncle Sam to leverage into a bigger and better property. So if you're looking to build wealth in real estate, the best way to do it is to do it through the 1031 exchange, so all of your money stays in your pocket. Good reason to consider an exchange. Now, some of your clients may already be very wealthy. And when you own a lot of real estate and you have a lot of money tied up in real estate, one of your biggest concerns is, how do I protect and preserve that wealth? If you have $50 million worth of real estate in San Francisco and there is an earthquake, all of your wealth might have just slid into the ocean. So how do you protect that wealth? Well, you do it by diversifying your portfolio. And when you own real estate, you can diversify by going into different geographies or different asset classes, or both. A diversification strategy is key right now, and using 1031 exchange to diversify, you do it tax-free. You can sell your rental property in San Francisco and you can get into a different area that is less prone to earthquakes. Okay, so diversification is a key reason why you might employ a 1031 exchange. Now, another reason people do 1031 exchanges has to do with time. And two things happen over time. Number one, you get sick and tired of owning your property. And number two, your property becomes fully depreciated. These are two of the most common reasons I see clients do 1031 exchanges for. You've got an 80-year-old who owns real estate. Well, they are probably not interested in managing the property, dealing with the tenants. So they may consider a 1031 exchange to get out of a tough to manage property and into something that is easier to manage. And then lastly, ladies and gentlemen, people do 1031 exchanges because right now we've got some very unfriendly rent control laws in California. So people are looking to exchange out of their rent controlled property and into properties that are not governed by rent control. So these are the reasons why people do exchanges. And what I want you to take away from this presentation is, I am guessing that you know people in your database who might want to consider an exchange for some of these reasons. And I want you to have conversations with those people about the 1031 exchange, because you will have people that you know that may benefit from a diversification strategy. Maybe they are sick of managing property. Maybe they just don't understand rent control and they're scared of it, and they want to get out of a rent controlled property and into something that is not governed by rent control. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you do not know people who might want to consider an exchange, you can go to your title rep and you can get farm lists for people who own rental property that may consider an exchange, right? People who have owned property for 25, 26, 27 years, they might be sick and tired of it, and they may consider an exchange into something that's easier to manage. You might be able to get lists for people who own lots of property in one area and may need to diversify. Okay, so you can use the title company's resources to start developing great farming lists, and you can start a marketing campaign tomorrow. Now, when you do start having conversations with these investors, what I want you to do is market solutions, not yourself. Okay, most realtors, they market themselves. They put their face on a billboard or on a shopping cart and they say, I'm the greatest realtor around. And that may be true. But if I'm an investor, I don't care how great you are. I care about me and my problems and how you can help me solve them. And when you market solutions, here's something to consider. A solution that a solution that an investor may have is that they may have a rent-controlled property And because of rent control, their cash flow is constrained. But if you can market a solution to them where you sell that property for them and exchange them into a different market with no rent control, you can probably increase their cash flow considerably. If you market that idea to the right person, you're going to get a listing. Let me give you another example. Someone's got a property in the Bay Area that's worth a ton of money. It's fallen apart. The rent on it is terrible or non-existent. If you can sell that property for the client and show them how to get into fractional ownership of a institutional grade property that they don't have to manage at all, ladies and gentlemen, you may get a listing. Think about this. You've got a really rundown property. It's got terrible tenants. It's a piece of junk. You hate managing it. And a realtor presents an idea to you. And the realtor says, hey, let me sell this property and I can exchange you out of that and into something that is shiny and new that you don't have to manage. Because Toby's company puts these deals together. You can own a piece of a $50 million apartment building. Do you think that investor is going to have a conversation with you? Absolutely. You may not get the listing, but you're going to get a conversation because you're providing solutions. You've got a crummy property and you're showing your client how to get out of that crummy property tax-free and into an institutional grade property that they don't even have to manage, that produces 5 to 6% cash flow. That is a fantastic marketing idea. All right. So use these ideas to go have conversations with your client base. Another idea for you, rent control. All right. Use rent control to get listings. How do you use rent control to get listings? Well, you can go out and you can have conversations with people who own property in California but don't live in California. And you can tell them, hey, do you know that your property is subject to rent control? Do you know how difficult it is to evict a person in California? And this person who lives in Texas says, huh? What are you talking about? Well, you're going to have a conversation. And that conversation may lead to a listing where you can show them how to get out of their property that is governed by very strict rent control and into a property in their area via 1031 exchange that is much, much easier to manage because there is no rent control laws. So use the rent control laws to your advantage. A lot of people own property in California but don't live in California, and they have no clue about the eviction process or the statewide rent control laws. Now, finally, if you're going to do a 1031 exchange, you need to let people know that you know how to do 1031 exchanges. Jerry took my class about, 10 years ago. And after my class, he said, hey, Leonard, is it okay if I put 1031 exchange specialist on my business card? I said, absolutely. You know how to sell real estate. You know how to buy real estate. You know how to do 1031 exchanges because you know me, right? Let people know that you know how to do 1031 exchanges. And ladies and gentlemen, you will do 1031 exchanges. I guarantee it. People know that I'm the 1031 exchange guy. In fact, I was at my daughter's soccer game about 6 months ago, and the lady standing next to me said, hey, you're the 1031 guy, right? And I said, yep. She said, well, my mother-in-law owns 15 rental properties, and she's got to do some exchanges coming up. Guess what? I handled all of her exchanges because people know that I do exchanges. Once people know that you are capable at the 1031 exchange process, you will start doing 1031 exchanges for investors. So let people know. And then finally, if you want to do these exchanges, you need a good support team. All right. My company has been doing these for 20 years. Well, I've been doing these for 20 years. I started this company back in 2006. You're going to use me as a resource, and I want you to. I want you to pick up the phone and call me anytime you have a question about the 1031 exchange process. You're going to need a good escrow and title person to help you farm and to help you close deals. And then lastly, you're going to need someone to help you find replacement property to complete the exchange. Because the replacement property that your client absolutely wants might not happen. She might not get it. So you're going to want a person who can help you with backups for your exchange properties. And ladies and gentlemen, that person is on the phone right now. His name is Toby Costello. He works, as I mentioned, at a company called Hamilton Zants, and Toby's company goes out and buys $50 million apartment buildings, or even bigger. And what they do is they sell you a little slice to complete your exchange. And then Toby's company manages that property for you. I don't want to steal Toby's thunder, though, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Toby to go ahead and share his presentation with you. So Toby, I'm passing the microphone over to you right now. If you can share your screen and unmute your phone, we'll be able to hear you.
Perfect. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfect. I can hear you. Now go ahead and share your screen, and we're going to be able to see your presentation.
Let me see. I'm not seeing anything to accept it. Let me look at the control panel.
Let me try one more thing. How about now, Toby?
There we go.
Perfect.
Show my screen. Here we go. Perfect. Can you see my screen now?
Yep, we can all see your screen. Perfect.
Super. Cool. Well, Leonard, thank you so much for the very warm intro. You may have missed your calling as a motivational speaker, but I appreciate it. This has been really good. And thanks for everybody else that joined. I've known Leonard for a really long time. My background was as a broker in the Bay Area. And so I work at Hamilton Zants now, and I'll talk a little bit about my background and as a broker and ways I found that Hamilton Zants was useful for me, and then also what we do as a company today. So here's a quick disclaimer. I just want to make sure that we're all clear. I'm not recommending anything, selling anything. I'm just giving information today. So hopefully that is clear. So here's our quick agenda. I'll give a quick intro to Hamilton Zants. We can talk about ways that folks invest with Hamilton Zants. We are a multifamily sponsor. We buy multifamily properties all throughout the country. And so we'll give some reasons and actual data behind why we think that's a good idea. And then we'll open it up for question and answer at the end. So without further ado, so my background, again, as I mentioned, is through the brokerage world. I did office and industrial leasing for about 1.5 years, and then I sold apartment buildings in the Bay Area for almost 10 years. I worked at a boutique company for about 6, and then I worked at CBRE, which is a large company, for about 3. All the time selling apartment properties, mostly in the Bay Area. And I got introduced to Hamilton Zants because Leonard talks about marketing solutions to people, and I think as a broker or as an agent, you're in the relevancy business. You want to be relevant to people, and so when I would cold call people and they would say, "Okay, I'll agree to meet with you. Let's do a listing," they would say, "Great, I would really like to sell my building, but I don't know what I would do next." Right? I don't want to buy a Walgreens, and I don't want to own more real estate in the Bay Area because I'm kind of fed up with it. So what else are my options? And so I would bring investors and potential folks through the doors of Hamilton Zants as a potential for their upleg for replacement property. So that was really good. They helped me definitely win listings. And I'll get the bad news out front here because I know I'm on the line with lots of real estate agents and brokers, and I know how you get paid. We cannot and we do not pay commissions or referral fees. But we are definitely part of the team that Leonard was mentioning in terms of building your team out. We can be very instrumental, and we can definitely help you win listings and build some security for folks to know that if I am to sell this property, there's an off-ramp and it's not as abrupt and terrifying as it may seem. So as a company, we were founded in 2001 by Mark Hamilton and Tony Zants. I always tell the story of the first property we bought because it's almost exactly how we operate today. So 2001, Mark Hamilton, Tony Zants, a couple of friends put some money together to buy a property in Oakland, 16 units near Highland Hospital. They had some cash, and they had some other friends and family who had some cash. And at that same time, Tony Zans, his father, was in an active 1031 exchange, and he 1031 exchanged into that same property. And so you had a combination of lots of people with cash, equity, and then one person doing a 1031 exchange coming together to buy a property. So they bought that building, fixed it up, paid some cash flow, eventually sold it, did another 1031 exchange, and we've been doing that ever since. So if you look at it today, we're still based in the Bay Area. Normally in San Francisco, we're right in the Presidio, although we're kind of loosely based on lots of kitchens and couches all around the Bay Area because we're all working from home right now. We're not a REIT, we're not a fund, and our investments are really on a per property basis. And so we, again, we're big believers in multifamily. So we've purchased over $4 billion worth of real estate since 2001. As of May, so basically right now, we own 87 different properties. That's just over 21,000 units in 15 different states, 27 different submarkets. And I'll get to the map here in a second. You'll see a blank spot. We don't own any apartments in the state of California. We like the fundamentals from an economic and an employment standpoint, but we have a tough time with rent control and some of the headwinds pricing wise in the Bay Area. And a couple key things to mention. We, the company, Mark, Tony, and Kurt, who's the third partner, and employees, we invest a combination of at least 5% of the equity into every single property that we purchase. And then all employees that work for Hamilton Zans, we're all salaried. We don't get paid commissions. So here's where we own. We own coast to coast, obviously with a big giant California-shaped blank spot on the West Coast. If you rewound maybe 4 years, we owned nothing east of Texas. But there's a handful of sellers that we have very good relationships with. And when they're selling properties, it'll be a good reason for us to kind of get out of our geographic comfort zone and explore new properties in new areas. So here's a quick snapshot of our portfolio. This is as of the end of 2019, so that 91 number of properties is a little bit off right now because we've sold a couple at the beginning of the year and also purchased some. But I think some key things to pick out here, people who sell their real estate in the Bay Area, like Leonard had mentioned, they usually have artificially low cash flow relative to their price of their real estate. And so a key measuring stick that we get measured by is our average distribution, right? That's cash flow paid to investors. And so if you looked at our portfolio at the end of 2019, our average cash flow, that's that average distribution number, is just shy of 6%. That's calculated annually, but we pay our distributions monthly.
Hey, Toby.
And then yes, sir.
Toby, can you, sorry to interrupt, but can you click that button up on the top of your screen that says use slideshow?
Oh, sorry. Perfect.
There
Is that better?
We can see it better. Perfect. Thanks, guys.
All right. Sorry. No worries. So our average distribution is just shy of 6%. The other way that we get measured is an internal rate of return. That's this. Let me see if I can. That's this number here, the 14%. So this is properties that we've sold. Our average internal rate of return has been just over 14%. And our average holding period is just shy of 6 years for the properties that we have sold. So we're very much in this for the long run. Our number 1, 2, and 3 priorities. Whenever we buy a property, our number 1 is preservation of capital. That means taking care of the real estate, so that if you give us $1, we give you at least $1 back when we sell the real estate. And then the second one is stable and distributable cash flow from the operations at that particular property. And then the third one is appreciation at the time of sale. But it really is, number 1 is capital preservation. So there's kind of 2 typical forms of ownership that we will use. One is tenancy in common, and the other is DST. And I'll get to the DST in just one second. But I start with TIC because it's our bread and butter and what we've done a lot of. and it's also a little bit easier to comprehend, especially because most folks in the Bay Area at least have a baseline understanding of what a TIC investment is. So at its core, it's two or more people that co-own real estate through undivided fractional ownership. So what that really means, it's no different than Leonard and I, just two buddies. He has $1, I have $1. He creates his own entity that does not include me, and I create my own entity that does not include him. He and I walk into the bank together. We apply for a loan together, him with his entity, me with mine. We get the loan, we buy the real estate, and then we own it. And then he and I share in all the ups and downs, left and right, proportionate to our ownership interest. In this case, it's 50-50. And that's what we do, albeit on a much larger scale. Leonard mentioned we will buy our normal property that we buy is about $50 million of total purchase price. And anywhere from 60 to 70% of that will be in the form of a loan. But we're raising large amounts of money, and we do it typically in the form of either a TIC or a DST. So there's some pros and cons to both. The pros of a TIC investment, one is you have discretion over your capital, and you pick the property that you get to invest in, right? You sell that 10-unit apartment building in downtown Palo Alto that you've owned forever. You get to pick where you go, and you are in your own LLC, and you have autonomy. It's just you or your spouse or whomever in that entity. You can exchange in, and then you can also exchange out. And really the plus for a lot of folks is you get ownership in real estate, but you don't get the management headache. We call it tenants and toilets, the two things that nobody really wants to deal with. We own a sister company called Mission Rock Residential. They're based out of Denver. They've got about 700 total employees, and they manage 100% of our multifamily real estate. So when we pick up the phone to talk to the management company, we don't have 10 of them sprinkled all around the country. We have one company, and we have a good relationship with them. There's common ownership between the two firms. And so it makes it much clearer line of sight to the property. And then a TIC allows for a flexible business plan. Usually if you see one of our properties and it's an older property and it looks like it's a more value add type piece of real estate, think 1970s, hasn't been dramatically renovated, and needs a fair amount of work, that'll probably be a TIC investment with us. And if there are pros, there are cons. The cons are you have a lack of control over day-to-day decisions. A lot of your clients are going to be folks that, they own real estate. Their full-time job is taking care of their real estate. And when you sell their property, you're functionally putting them out of a job. And they're aware of that, but they're also, they're going to have to give up a lot of control, right? We pick out paint colors. We hire and fire staff. We sign leases. We do all of that on behalf of the investors. And so people that have a tough time giving up control, that can be tough. The other con is we have a pretty high financial barrier to entry. Our company, to do a 1031 exchange into a TIC position, you need at least $1 million of equity. And so whatever you have in the loan, take that out of your sales price, and what's left over, that's got to exceed $1 million to do a TIC exchange with us. Some sponsors, it's significantly higher. The other cons, and this is just kind of, normal business stuff. Sometimes you'll run across people that are unprofessional or inexperienced. Mark has been putting together deals, Mark Hamilton, since the late 80s. Tony Zans, his family's been doing the same since, a long time. We've been around since 2001. We lived through and survived the last recession. We're living through and surviving whatever is going on right now. So you're going to want someone, at least in our mind, someone that's got some longevity and some experience through good and bad times. And then I think the big other con here is there's a lack of liquidity. Your client's going to be invested in real estate. And so if they think they're going to, need to put a kid through college in the next couple of years, and they think they're going to park some money and get it out in a year or two, this is not that investment. If you look at our track record, we've held properties for on average 6 years. So think 6 to 10 years, we're going to hold the real estate. So it's definitely set it and forget it money. And so all this is distilled down to our typical TIC investors. They're high net worth. They're usually selling a Bay Area property. They've got a large amount of gains. They have multiple heirs. and they want to spend more time with their family or on hobbies or leisure, or in normal times, usually doing some traveling. So that's TIC investing. The other form of ownership it's called a Delaware Statutory Trust. We call it DST for short. I'll read you the definition, and then I'll give you the kind of the nuts and bolts of what it truly is. It is a separate legal entity created as a trust where each owner has a beneficial interest in the trust, treated as owning undivided fractional interest in the property. What that really means is it works for a 1031 exchange. That's the headline. And it's just a different form of ownership. And usually, in an oversimplified version, what that means is a company like ours, Hamilton Zands, will find a piece of real estate. We'll say, we'd like to buy this real estate. We find 100% of the equity. And we find one loan for the property, and we buy the real estate. And when we do that, we then set up a trust. This is where the trust, or the Delaware Statutory Trust, comes in. We set up a trust, and the trust owns it. And then we turn around and we sell beneficial interests, right, fractional pieces of that trust to people, typically doing 1031 exchanges. You can invest cash, but most people do exchanges. And so what you're actually getting is a beneficial interest in the trust. It works for an exchange. The IRS has blessed it. Lots of people do it. We do it. And then your client is able to invest in the property. One of the benefits of doing a DST is we buy the real estate. We then have up to a year to 18 months to actually sell out all those interests in the trust. And so if you look at a normal transaction, your client, unless you're doing a reverse exchange, your client has to sell their real estate, and then they have to find another piece of real estate quickly to buy it, right? It's a forward exchange. We already own the real estate. So we bought, a property a couple of weeks ago. If your client sold their real estate 2 weeks from now, they could still conceivably exchange into that property. And so some of the pros, there's a lower financial barrier to entry. Our minimum for when we do DSTs is $100,000. So lower financial barrier to entry. It's $100,000 of equity. Remember, take your sales price, take out all the debt and costs, and whatever's left over is your total equity. But again, a lot of the same things are the same, right? You can exchange in. You have real estate without the management headache. You get all the same benefits of real estate from a tax perspective as well that you would if you owned it on your own. The other thing on the con side, and I realize we're getting close to the 1 hour mark, so I want to be respectful of time, is when you're looking at real estate sponsors that do DSTs, take a good look at their fees. They are sometimes upwards of 10 to 20% of your invested equity. Ours tend to be on the lower, if not underneath those amounts. But be cognizant of that, right? 20% is a lot of a fee. If you're measuring it against paying capital gains and all the other taxes that are owed of upwards of 33%, it's not so bad, but it's still pretty significant. And the other thing is you're going to want to, again, make sure that you're going to invest with a sponsor that knows what they're doing, and they've been around for a while, because this is large sums of money. And so our typical DST investor is usually one of two things. They're usually selling a smaller property where they have less than $1 million to exchange, but they still want to avoid taxes. They want to replace cash flow, et cetera. The other one is if you have someone that has $1 million in equity, but they have a high premium on diversification, and they have to split it up 3 ways. This is where we'll also see people as DST investors. They'll split it up a handful of ways so they can sprinkle their risk around and potentially their reward around as well. And I can make this available to other folks, but we are believers in multifamily. We kind of felt it in our bones for a really long time, but we wanted to put some data behind it. So we commissioned a white paper with CBRE and their extensive research team to come up with their 10 reasons to invest in apartments in the U.S. Some significant things, and I think a lot of these still ring true, even with what's going on with COVID. Demographics are going to favor renting. It's not going to get easier to purchase a home in this country. And we're seeing more and more renters by choice. These are people that make a lot of money, but they want to have a pretty fluid lifestyle. We have seen, and it's been borne out recently, that apartments, while they're not doing as well as they were 3 months ago, they're still doing better than a lot of other asset classes. except for maybe data centers right now, throughout what we're experiencing with COVID. And so I'll end it there, maybe open it up for questions, but I appreciate it, and thanks for listening to us. We're around, and this is my contact info if you want to discuss you or your clients' exchanges.
Yeah, thanks so much, Toby. And I want to emphasize why I bring Toby on to the calls. First of all, I have a ton of confidence in Toby and his company. I've known them for a long time. But I think it is imperative that you know people like Toby, and you know that there are alternatives out there that Toby's company can provide. And the reason why is because very often your client will not do a darn thing until you can show her what she can trade into, right? So we hear all the time from clients that say, oh, you know, my seller, and when I say client, I mean a realtor. The realtor says, my client won't do anything because he or she does not know what to trade into, or we can't find anything because the inventory is so low. And when you have a resource like Toby that can provide you a 5 to a 6% cash flow investment in a $50 million apartment building that you don't have to manage, and you can show that to your client as something she can trade into, you're going to get the listing. And it's not always going to happen, right? Because clients don't always want to get into, you know, Toby's products, but being able to have Toby as a resource is a phenomenal advantage when you go on a listing presentation. So yes, Toby cannot pay you a commission if your client goes into his property, because you have to have a securities license to get paid. But what you've just done by introducing Toby's solution is you've gotten the listing that you might not otherwise have gotten. So again, Toby's product is something that I think if you are a realtor and you work with investors, you have to have on your radar, because eventually they're going to learn about these products, because, you know, the Tobys of the world are out there talking to investors. And wouldn't it be great if you were able to provide this solution to your client, get the listing, and then help your client satisfy their 1031 exchange. So we think it's important to know the people who provide solutions. Obviously, Toby's one of them, and you can get in touch with Toby. His information's on the screen. When you do have 1031 exchanges or 1031 exchange questions, we would love to be your preferred 1031 exchange accommodator. My information also is on the screen. We're going to send out a copy of today's presentation. It will be posted on YouTube later this afternoon. So if you want to share it with colleagues or rerun it later because you missed a part or you just want to hear it again, it will be available to you. I do not see any additional questions. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. So everybody have a fantastic rest of your day. And if you do think of a question at some point, just shoot it over in an email to me. And actually, as I'm talking, we have two questions. So question number one, if Hamilton Zance is used, does an investor still identify 3 properties? Well, Mike, one of the properties you identify would be a Hamilton Zance property, and then you can identify 2 other ones. So when you do identification, Hamilton Zance could be one, and then you can have 2 others. So Hamilton Zance will take a slot on your identification letter if you wanted to consider them. And then Rob says, if a group of 5 heirs sells a $5 million property in probate, does that group have to do a 1031 equal or greater in value? So good question. When you actually inherit a property, you have a stepped up basis. So there might not be any reason to do a 1031 exchange when you inherit a property, unless you inherited that property a long time ago and you've built up your own gain. Okay. And then if the group sells the property, it depends on how they own the property. If they're all on title, they can all take their share of the property and do whatever they want with it. If they simply have inherited the property and left the property in the trust, well, now they need to drop the property out of the trust if they want to all go their own ways. So Rob, that's a little bit more technical question, and we can talk about that offline if you have a situation, that merits it. But it can get tricky with group-owned properties depending on how the property is owned. All right, so I don't see any further questions popping up, so we're going to go ahead and log off. Again, thank you all for joining today, and we all look forward to doing business with you soon. And stay safe, and have a happy rest of your Thursday. Take care, everyone.